the most beneficent and the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you. I'm Maya Zara, and it's my honor this evening to introduce you to this very special event. I'll give a brief introduction about myself. I'm a lecturer of teacher education and currently in my final year of my PhD, and cannot say no to exciting opportunities like this one. So here I am. You may notice by my accent, I am from England, but I've been very fortunate to do a lot of work with the Glasgow community. So I'm very privileged and honoured to be here with all of you this evening. This is the second year Alphabet Scotland and the Bishops' Committee for Interreligious Dialogue have celebrated Human Fraternity Day. Human Fraternity Day is the annual celebration of the signing of the document on human fraternity signed by Pope Francis and Sheikh Ahmed el-Tayeb, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, on the 4th of February 2019. Tonight, we're looking at a section of the document on human fraternity that deals with women, and we are glad to have three distinguished women who will help us reflect on the particular sentence that says, efforts must be made to free women from historical and social conditioning that runs contrary to the principles of their faith and dignity. This is a compelling topic as religion encourages the rights, honour and protection of women, and we live in a society that increasingly runs contrary to that. We find that sometimes claims of liberation and emancipation for women are in fact a disguised form of exploitation and deprivation of dignity. The Holy Quran dedicates a whole chapter to women, titled The Women, Surah An-Nisa, and verse 1 declares, O humanity, be mindful of your Lord, who created you from a single soul, and from it he created its mate, and through both he spread countless men and women. This verse beautifully exemplifies human fraternity, emphasizing the origin of creation. So we come together tonight as men and women of the Abrahamic faiths with a united aim to discuss the efforts that must be made to free women from historical and social conditioning, and in turn free society with the principles of faith and dignity. A few household notices. You will notice that you are muted. Please keep yourself muted during the dialogue out of respect for our speakers. There will be an opportunity for questions. Please put these into the chat and only the organisers can see these. I would now like to introduce Dr. Mary Cullen, who will facilitate our dialogue. Dr. Mary Cullen studied fine arts and history at the University of Glasgow and worked in teaching, local government and international development before returning to university over 40 years later to study theology. Her PhD is on the ecclesial relationship between ordained and lay people in the Catholic Church. Mary has always been involved in voluntary work in the church and the local community on issues of justice and peace, and currently edits the independent Catholic journal Open House. Over to you, Dr. Mary.
Thank you very much, Maya. And it's a great pleasure to be here tonight to take part in this dialogue. When Pope Francis and the Grand Imam signed the document on human fraternity 3 years ago now, Pope Francis used a lovely image. He invited us to enter together as a family into an ark which can sail the stormy seas of the world, and he called it the Ark of Fraternity. I would like to introduce two women who can help us steer the ship and navigate some of the issues that have been raised by tonight's text that Maya has already spoken of. Fatemeh Araghi was born in a high-rank cleric family in Iran and raised in London. Influenced by her father's role in society, she was always active in religious and cultural community activities. At the same time, she pursued her academic aspirations, obtaining a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture, an MA in History and Theory of Architecture from the University of Westminster, and recently graduated with a Master of Architecture from Sheffield Hallam University. She is currently a community activist in Glasgow, engaged in learning activities for children and looking to mobilise women to engage in community and social events. Dr. Sara Parvis teaches in the Divinity School at the University of Edinburgh. Her research interests are within the patristic period of Christian history. She's interested in the search for some of the hidden voices of early Christianity, both doctrinal and sociological. Sara was born in Aberdeen and grew up in Edinburgh. She studied twice at undergraduate level at the University of Oxford, first in English and French, and later in theology, studying for a PhD at the University of Edinburgh. She held a British Academy postdoctoral fellowship from October 2002 till September 2005. So welcome to you both, Sara and Fatima. I'm going to start the discussion with a question about the statement that we're looking at tonight. It says, efforts must be made to free women from historical and social conditioning that runs contrary to the principles of their faith and dignity. Perhaps, Sara, you would start and answer the question, what do you think the significance of this statement is?
Thanks very much, Mary. Well, I do think it's a very significant statement for a number of reasons. Firstly, that it actually acknowledges that there is historical and social conditioning that run contrary to the principles of faith and dignity. I mean, in the Catholic tradition, which obviously I know much better because it's my tradition, we have a lot of popular misogyny. One of the texts that I teach, which is a 15th century text, Book of the City of Ladies, is produced an analysis by Christine de Pizan, who was the Venetian French writer, who eventually became a nun. She analyzed the philosophical and theological basis of misogyny going back to the 1st century and beyond. And there's nothing said nowadays about misogyny that she wasn't saying in the 15th century. So these are long-standing problems. They all have good answers. They have good theological answers. They have good philosophical answers. You know, obviously a lot of traditional Catholic views on women were based on wrong biology of Aristotle, were based on Aristotle's biology, which was based on the observation of turtles, and so assumed that because turtles generate male and female by having sex at different temperatures, the same was true of human beings, because we really only found out about reproductive biology very, very recently. And in fact, it's still a very live topic, how reproductive biology works. And so all of those things that are acknowledged that there is a problem, if you like, and there has been a problem for a long time, gives us an opportunity now, I think, to address this as faiths. Yeah, I think that's probably enough to start us off. Thanks.
Thanks, Sara. Thank you very much. Fatima, how would you answer the question about the significance of the statement from the two authors of the document?
Well, I think the statement really offers a very balanced proposal to actualize the core principles relating to women's affairs in religious communities. So to make the most use of the capacity within their faith. It also subtly addresses the non-advancement of faith due to cultural influences with regards to the position of women in society. And at the same time, I think it addresses the need for modern secular societies to take a step back from radical liberalism so that they can accept people from different faiths as they are without any need to secularize or modernize them. Also considering the expansion of the world's population and growing religions such as Islam and Christianity, I feel an international awareness of Abrahamic faiths are quite necessary to encourage tolerance and coexistence across the world. And within that, women play an important role in society and should be able to practice their faith freely without any obstacles.
Very significant issues you've both touched on.
Mary, I'm not hearing you.
We can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm not. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep, sorry. I was just going to say you both opened up some of the significance of the document, which is really extremely significant indeed, I would say, and raises lots of questions. And I wondered, Sara, if you could say what aspects, you've already begun to touch on that, but what aspects of historical and social conditioning run contrary to the principles of your faith and dignity as a woman? Which would you focus on?
I do want to pick up something that Fatima said and also that Maya said, which I think is important that we take on board, the two sides of this. So the what I would call the secular gaze. We've heard a lot about the male gaze in feminism and in feminist studies. I think we now need to start talking about the secular gaze, according to which we have to, if you like, dress and present ourselves to an imagined secularist observer as though that were normal and good and right. And I think if you take the two forms of feminism and womanism, and obviously I would define myself as a feminist, but feminists, the womanist critique of feminists is that feminists are middle class, Western, out for better jobs, better money, better pay, and all that kind of thing. And that they kowtow to the secularist agenda of secularist feminists, and they don't take on board the needs of their sisters of faith. So sisters of the faiths of the world, but perhaps above all Catholic and Muslim women, and that faith is empowering for many women, way beyond what secular feminism could ever be. So I think there's that whole agenda that it's worth our talking about, that it's worth our taking on the problem of the secular gaze and recognizing it as a problem. So that's half of the set of things. But I also think we're now at a stage where we can address a lot of the wrong assumptions that have been built into the ways that, certainly Catholic theology has been taught in the past. So as I say, Aristotle is an obvious one. People still draw on Aristotelian biology or theology that's based on Aristotelian biology without realizing it's just completely wrong. It's been completely debunked by modern biology. And therefore, certainly within the Catholic Church, you still have plenty of Catholic statements of Catholic doctrine which draw effectively on Aristotelian biology. So we have to be upfront, I think, about, and I would like to see the Church actually step forward and say we recognize Aristotelian biology is wrong, and really go through a lot of that list of the ingredients of misogyny that were already known in the 15th century and already listed by Christine de Pizan, and note that they're not part of inherent Catholicism, and they're not part of inherent Christianity, and they're not part of an inherent faith of the Abrahamic faiths. They're that the dignity of women and the importance of women is clear in all of those faiths, that aspects of theology and aspects of philosophy have been taken up over the years and made far more use of than they should be. And in some cases, they are discredited and should be discredited. But also, I think on the other, to return to the other side, we also, so that's a social conditioning. We need better knowledge. Obviously I teach early Christian history. And a big part of what I try and do when I introduce people to, so I'm doing Augustine at the moment, both at undergraduate and at postgraduate level. If you look up Augustine online, you'll find a whole list of scare quotes that he didn't think women were human beings, and all sorts of problems, all of which are untrue. People take a sentence out of context, and nobody notes that Augustine is the only man in the ancient world, certainly that I've ever heard of, who wrote a book explaining that he was wrong about everything in life that mattered most, including the faith, and his mother was right. And so I think a whole lot of the unknown side of the tradition of women within, as I say, the Catholic tradition, I'm sure it's true in the Islamic tradition as well, that this should be better known by Catholics themselves as well as by the rest of society, that Catholicism has a much stronger story to tell about women and the role of women in its past than is often told, including by Catholic women themselves. But of course, on the other side, there are specific things like family, I think, that we have something to offer to the secular society from our experiences. Even just the experiences of people still alive, of people who had 11, 12 children, and what that was actually like in practice. That's going to be forgotten, certainly in the Catholic world. So I really hope that generation of Irish women and people who came from that world, a very different, more rural world, that horrifies people nowadays to hear about. I hope we'll just hear a lot more from those people about what the reality of, say, Catholic rural Ireland, good and bad, was, so that we don't just get this kind of series of scare quotes that don't actually touch the reality, but that we get something much more about the reality of people's lives. And I think women are in a very good position to do that, because women have been observers often, and therefore they've seen what's happened and they've seen the stories, and then they're in a position to tell them. So I'd like to see more storytelling from within the faiths as well, good and bad, but just telling it like it was.
Thank you, Sara. I'm wondering how Fatima, how you relate to Sara's view.
I think she mentioned a lot of interesting points, and I think within Islam, the ingredients of misogyny that she interestingly mentioned is mainly cultural influences on the religion of Islam. So to begin, my point of view on this question is, first and foremost, I'd like to introduce you to like two main categories of religion, first being cultural religions and second positive religions. Before I go to the examples, in cultural religions, there is no right or wrong. They are just cultural practices or rituals, but in a positive religion, there's a right way of doing something and everything else is in fact wrong. For example, during the month of Ramadan, we don't have different cultures of fasting in Islam. There's only one way of performing this Islamic ruling. And according to Islam, some cultures are acceptable and some are not, because we have our standard Islamic Sharia. Sharia means law. Those cultures that are not in contrary within our Islamic rulings have no problem. And the main discussion point is where those cultures are against our Islamic rulings, where do they stand? Before mentioning the aspects of historical and social conditionings that run contrary to the principles of my faith, I'd like to give two examples of women who practiced their faith freely and went against the social and historical conditionings of their time, to also touch on the value of women in Islam and how in Western and local community cultures, certain aspects of social and historical conditioning run contrary to the faith of Islam. In Islam, 4 women are introduced as the woman of paradise. So we have Lady Fatima, Lady Maryam, Lady Khadija, and Lady Asiya. I don't have time to go into all of them, but for the purpose of this event, I'd like to focus on Lady Maryam, who we have a whole chapter about Lady Maryam in the Holy Quran, and how she and her family dealt with social and historical conditioning during their time. So Lady Maryam, who is Virgin Mary, mother of Jesus in the Christian faith or Prophet Isa in Islam, before she was born, her father wanted to dedicate her to the temple in Jerusalem. But when she was born, they saw that she was a girl. And I'd like to quote you this verse from the Holy Quran in Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, ayah 35. It says, when the wife of Imran said, my Lord, indeed I have pledged to you what is in my womb, consecrated, so accept this, consecrated for your service, so accept this from me, indeed you are the hearing, the knowing. So in that time, it was impossible for a girl to enter the temple, let alone live there. And when she was born, there is an ayah in the Holy Quran dedicated to her birth that says, when she delivered in Surah Al-Imran chapter 3 ayah 36, she says, my Lord, I have delivered a female, and Allah was most knowing of what she delivered, and the male is not like the female, and I have named her Mary, and I seek refuge for her in you, for her descendants from Satan, be expelled from the mercy of Allah. So they went against the historical and social conditionings of the time and dedicated her to the temple. And the divine miracles happened through her, according to great established religions, meaning Christianity and Islam, where Virgin Mary is more than a saint. So moving on, like we have many other examples in today's modern society, like in Shia Islam, we have Banu Mujtahida Amin, who is known as the woman who crossed many cultural barriers by studying religion in the way that was taught in Islamic seminaries, where women were not culturally accepted to attend, but she pursued religious knowledge in the best way and achieved very high ranks. And apart from women who crossed barriers to defy social and historical conditionings to practice their faith, it also shows in the core principles of Islam, women are held at a high regard, and unfortunately it is the social and historical conditions that come from cultural beliefs or practices that defy this fact and do not allow women to practice their faith in the best way. Other examples are like Islamophobia is a very big issue which creates a wide spectrum of social conditionings, and due to racial pressure and Islamophobia, not wearing hijab is being more normalized. Moving on from that, the rise of social media stars that rises stars through hijab, attracting followers, then taking off their hijab as they do not relate with it anymore, and this consciously or unconsciously creates social conditionings for the wider community. However, this may also be due to historical conditionings of their own cultures, because more emphasis is placed on the females wearing the hijab, where less emphasis is placed on the men in the community to observe the hijab of the gays. And some women would have maybe been more comfortable to follow the principles of their faith, and social conditions would not have been a barrier if equal emphasis was based on the hijab of women and men. Also, we shouldn't forget, apart from radical liberalist governments, our main misunderstanding is not with the masses. Our other issue is with the mass producers, whose main problem is not ideology or theoretical framework. The main problems comes from historical and social conditionings as the matter of money and profit that use the body of the female as a commodity or a decorative product. And nonetheless, to summarize, social conditionings that come from cultural influences resulting in a position of women not being held in high regard, in parallel to how Islam encourages it, runs contrary to the principles of our faith and dignity. And secondly, the pressure on women in Western society to fit into an imaginary form of the ideal successful woman, where women are pressurized into hiding their faith, is another form of social and historical conditioning, in my opinion.
Sara, would you like to respond?
I mean, yes, I really agree with especially that last point about women being subject to social pressure to hide their faith. And in the name of, I mean, there's a certain secularism that claims a moral high ground it has no right to. That secularists were, you know, in many cases still are, were racist and sexist until 10 minutes ago. And all of a sudden, they're the guardians of all that is good and the owners of the moral high ground. And I think, you know, both women in Islam and women in Catholicism and in Christianity in general, I mean, certainly the whole question of, I mean, what gets called modest dress in some Christian circles, and I hate it when it's policed by men, because I don't think it should be. Yeah. But women should have the right to do this for themselves. You know, that they shouldn't have to wear beach wear. I mean, I'm sure we all remember that ridiculous incident on the beach in Marseille, when women who were wearing bikinis were told to, you know, they had to wear bikinis, they had to show off their bodies. And you sort of think, what on earth is liberating about that? What's liberating is for women to be able to make their own decisions about how they want to dress. And, you know, if they prefer to be covered up, then why not? It's that their whole, I think, actually an interesting thing about COVID is we've discovered through wearing face masks a whole lot of things about what it feels to be covered up. And a lot of people have sort of thought this through again. But in terms of sort of inside, outside, extrovert, introvert ways of dealing with yourself, it just, I mean, you can confirm or not this, but it just makes you feel differently about your own interior world and the outside world if you're wearing hijab, presumably, or, you know, equivalent veils. It can be seen by secularists as a badge of oppression, but that's their eyes, that's the secular gaze. You know, they're not stopping to ask how that actually feels to the women themselves.
It seems to me that both of you are suggesting that one of the things that would help set us free from that inherited conditioning or the current conditioning is for both Christian women and Muslim women, and maybe for the Christian community more, the whole Christian community, the whole Muslim community, to have a better sense of their history and have a better sense of where some of these elements of conditioning come from. Would that be something you would both say? There's a great deal of ignorance around, I think you were both saying in different ways. Would that be an important way in which people could be free from that conditioning and that kind of false understanding that seems to be around very strikingly in both of the traditions as both of you speak? Sara, would you think that would be good? You're obviously very aware of the history of the situation of women in the Christian community. And you spoke about Augustine and about 15th century and so on. Do you think we should be teaching it more? Or remembering the stories more recently? You spoke about that too.
Yes, I mean, both of those I think would help. I mean, I think firstly, the different gazes that are on us, and it was very interesting to hear Fatima talk about the need to restore the male hijab, if you like, I assume that's the Islamic version of the male gaze, the custody of the gaze, that for us to rethink who's looking at whom and why, first to look at ourselves with new eyes, I suppose, the eyes of our faith. I mean, I think, again, in both faiths, we would say that being created by God is essential to our understanding of ourselves. It's amazing how liberating people find Augusta, the great insight of the class I was teaching today on Monday on Augustine's Confessions. And I get new insights from it every time I teach it. It's about the 10th time I've taught it. And they talked about, it's really about a liberation from self-hatred to self-love. And they talked at, Augustine's Confessions. I mean, there are lots of other things you can say about it. But that idea of religion bringing you from self-hatred to self-love, and in Augustine's case, and I think this would be true of us all in general, people of faith, it's recognizing that you're created by God, and therefore you're created as good, you're created to praise God, but you're created to be beautiful things created by God. So that's how I would sort of start off with us all thinking about how you turn from any form, and there certainly are forms of self-hatred which are culturally conditioned and gender conditioned. So certainly it's a question of looking at those, but it's also a question of looking at all forms of, if you like, unfriendly gaze. Augustine talks about his three audiences: the audience of his enemies, the audience of, the sort of gossips who are going, aye, against his feather, and the audience of people who love him. And God is the ultimate audience of the one who loves us. So we have to turn from the hostile audiences towards the audience of the one who loves us, relearn ourselves from the gaze of Jesus or from the gaze of God. I take it this would work in Islamic theology. And then, having rediscovered ourselves as created by God, then look out and then see how we re-understand ourselves as male and female, but also as people in specific societies with specific conditions. And you can do that with modern science. You can do it with, there's a whole lot of modern science about bodies and human bodies and the human mind and so on, but also looking back into history. But as well, just telling each other stories. And I think it's part about reclaiming our stories as women made by God for a good purpose, and what that actually means to us ourselves, and then telling each other about them, and then moving out from that into society. But as part of that, having the sort of pride and the courage to say, yeah, being created by God means something, and let's have that conversation. And people who don't want to have that conversation, that's fine, but don't claim the moral high ground over us because you don't want to have it.
Thank you, Sara. Fatima, you would agree with that, I would say.
Yeah, I just, sorry to jump in. I think this conversation is very liberating for me to be like in common grounds with the Christian faith, because being a student and studying with this hijab, as you can see on the screen, it is liberating to see that, to be able to say to like the secular counterpart that what makes you think that you have the moral high ground because I'm a person of practicing faith. And the conversation like this is liberating, and as Sara mentioned, like being more familiar with our like the history of our faith, and like the important cultural figures. And more moving on from that, I think due to historical and of course social conditioning, women have been distanced from their initial purpose, and that being the heart of the home, the protector of the family, and living in the comfort of their home. And also me being able to freely state this without being labeled as my mindset being systematically gendered because of my faith and my background. And I think what would really set me free is for women to be able to be themselves in all societies. I don't know how active anyone here is on social media, but I don't know if you've seen I've seen more and more on TikTok videos where a lot of young ladies are acknowledging the fact that they are more comfortable with being stay-at-home wives or even mothers through videos stating that men were not supposed to know that we can do exactly what they can do. And I think governments should help in encouraging motherhood or even support women's choices in following religion and respect it and continue educating society on equality and diversity.
Thank you. I was just going to maybe, you've already taken, I mean, the conversation into a very interesting area, but if we widen it out even more, and from the sentence we've started with women, but in the wider context, just finally, if this can be the final question before we take some questions from those who are listening. Within the wider context of the arc of fraternity, which was thought of as a vehicle for peace into which we would both enter and work together, what do you think women in particular can contribute to its understanding, the arc of fraternity's understanding of our common humanity and our common commitment to peace building, which is, I think, very much part of the understanding of what the arc of fraternity is about. So women in particular, I think we've already talked a lot about the kind of contribution that women can make by feeling liberated, by feeling, as Sarah put it very beautifully, Sara, sorry, when she was speaking about, first of all, we are liberated and it's God's gaze that we stand before. What can we take from all of that to say, what would you name as our contribution to women and men's common humanity, our common humanity as people? Sara, would you like to comment?
I mean, I was been thinking about this. All I can think of is sisterhood, because I mean, I was talking oddly enough about this a couple of hours ago to a couple of colleagues of mine who you might, Muslim colleagues of mine, both Sunnis, Mona Siddiqui and Shadab Rahmatullah, about this, and they were both. Mona had actually been at a conference on this in the law faculty in the University of Edinburgh yesterday, and they were all being very rude about fraternity. She said they all felt that, you know, that actually fraternity is a cover-up and it's not very helpful, that it sounds nice and nobody has to do anything. And Mona was saying we need to actually talk about duty. Well, I think if we talk about sisterhood alongside fraternity, we were sort of joking about you know, sorority and you know, the sort of implications of that word, but the arc of sisterhood is something that I think we need to bring to this, and the fraternity needs its sisterhood. Both, I mean, obviously within the Catholic tradition, we have sisters, we have nuns who've worked through the whole thing. I mean, certainly, obviously, the role of women in the family is absolutely vital, and blood sisters and so on. But also, of course, Christianity has that second tradition, the alternative tradition, if you like, to the family, where you have, instead of having a blood family, you have a created family. So a family of people who are a family because of their relationship to, well, in Jesus in the Christian take. So that those two sorts of sisterhood, the sisterhood of blood, and then the sisterhood, you know, sisterhood as part of the human family, and then on the other hand, the sisterhood of intentional community, shared community that you build up because of what you share. I think you end up, I mean, obviously one's generalizing hopelessly, but you have more intimacy, you have a deeper understanding, partly because, you know, you're smaller and weaker, and you know, you have to fight off your brothers when they're fighting you for the last piece of cake or whatever. So I think we should make something of sisterhood within all this. I think we should ask that it not be left out, and ask to be given the chance, both among one another and among ourselves, to talk about what it means to us to be sisters, and how that's a particular element within the sort of notion of the arc of fraternity that's being talked about, which, I mean, I'm not sure if I could define what the contribution would be. All I can say is that we need to be there.
That's a fascinating answer. It reminds me of Pope Francis' criticism for Fratelli Tutti, his great encyclical, when the women seem to be missing. But of course, in Italian, in the opening words, it says, "My dear sisters and brothers." So language is a bit constricting, but that's a wonderful idea to say that we have to bring our sisterhood with us onto the ark and make it part of it. So I think that's a wonderful idea. Fatima.
Yeah, I thank you, Sarah, for that. I think that was an interesting point. I also agree with that. Like, sisterhood is very key. Also, I think women like inherently have this this power to be more understanding and have a lot of care for the society. And not to take a feminist turn to this discussion, but I think female leaders do provide have performed quite well in their positions in society. I think more space should be given for women to take leadership roles, and alongside the society accepting their roles, their natural roles, like motherhood, sisterhood, and all of that. And also, I think we can also look at the question from the point of view that how all humans can contribute to the understanding of our common humanities, and have like a more wider view on this issue.
Thank you, Fatima. I think now there should be some questions to both of you from those who are our audience tonight, whom we can't see at the moment. I don't know if it's Ahmed or Maya are going to bring forward the questions. Are there some questions in the chat room?
Yeah, we've got a few questions coming through. So let's come down. Yeah, so we also have, this is from Sheikh Mohammed Pakhdeen. We also have brotherhood and sisterhood in God, in Islam. In a hadith from the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, we read, human beings, God's creatures, are God's family. Oh, sorry, that's not a question. That's just a additional comment. So those of you who have joined us this evening, please do send us your questions in the chat box. I have a question myself, actually, more pertaining to the current context of the day and age in which we live, and the influence of technology, particularly on men and women in terms of social media, body image, and also the pandemic that we've currently gone through. We've also had a shadow pandemic, which you, I'm sure, are familiar with, which basically refers to the rise of violence against women, which has risen exponentially, unfortunately, during the pandemic. And again, I think some of these can be, well, can be traced towards this kind of the social constructs that we have and these ideas that we have in society, which can portray women in a certain way. And I think they've been subtly referred to, you know, in terms of the decorative element and a certain purpose that is viewed. To kind of both of you, I asked the question, how do you think we can utilize our faith to address the current issues and problems that we have?
Fatima, would you like to respond first? That's the question about the business about social media, body images, and the issue about violence against women that you were talking about during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think faiths need to be much more active and much more involved in social media, because like AI technology, artificial intelligence, is rapidly improving and increasing, and whatever you view, you would be continually seeing more of that. And I don't think we have enough presence from faiths in social media, and once that presence is there, that can help people in society know that there is help for them there. Like even more like faith community centers to be more open to being like a refuge center for these kind of problems, like domestic violence. But then we need to raise awareness about that. Like I've always mentioned this as a concern with my husband, who is the Imam of Al-Mahdi, that I would really like our center to be like a place where young girls would understand that you know, there is a place for you to come if there's an issue, if you have a conflict with your family, please do know that we're here, we can help you. Like, not just me, I mean, I'd say we're not as active on social media yet, but I think a lot of other faith communities should be more outspoken. And in this day and age with the pandemic, being present is the most important thing. And I think like a lot of training should be provided in that, because it's just rapidly improving. We need to keep pace with it.
Sara, where are you on social media?
Well, I'm not on social media, and it is something I feel quite strongly about, because I quit all my social media during lockdown. I find I had come to the conclusion, and this is a particularly Catholic problem. I don't know if you have this in Islam. There's an awful lot of really, really bad interaction between Catholics on social media, policing of one another, and you know, just real nastiness. So Catholic Twitter is legendarily horrible. It's sort of like right-wing and left-wing Catholics going at each other hammer and tongs. So what I would like to see for social media from a Catholic point of view is, and you know, I assume this would go for people of faith in general, is for everyone to stop fighting each other, stop trying to police each other about things they know nothing about. You know, you get dress policing, you get all sorts of things. People who orthodox police each other constantly without knowing, you know, the basics of the faith. So I would like to see really a kind of a total repentance of the way that Catholics engage with social media, a total rethinking of it, and a way of we can use it precisely to promote fraternity and sisterhood, and a way we can use it to promote peace and love, if you like, and justice, and a sort of total rethinking of what we're doing. But I'd also recognize that, you know, social media, and you hinted at this, Fatemeh, can be useful to reach out to people who are isolated and in dangerous positions. And I would not want to sort of take that away, because that is actually very important. And I know that Facebook can be helpful with that for people. So I'd like, on the one hand, if you like, an active repentance of all the people on social media who use it to for bad purposes, for within religions, thinking particularly of mine, but also I would like to see good use of social media to make connections. I mean, this is the double edges of social media, because it does make connections, it does do good things, but the algorithms are actually tweaked so that to start fights. I mean, Facebook tries to start fights. I suppose that's, I've never even been on TikTok, so I don't know how that works, but I know that there are big problems with body shaving and all that kind of thing. So in that sort of point of view, I think encouraging young women of faith to be proud of themselves as people of faith, and then sort of take on people who are trying to shame them would be a good thing. Coming on to the more, I mean, I don't want to say more serious problem, but the shadow pandemic of violence. And this is a big problem in general. I mean, there's a problem with racism. You know, there's been big problems in violence of all sorts against people who are disadvantaged in any way, but especially towards women and children as well. Talk about it. I think that's very good, and a very good start. Get the figures and encourage people who've been isolated to unisolate. I think we do need to actually talk about social policy and talk about things like the rules of self-isolation and whether that's really a good idea in another pandemic. Whether it's a good idea to basically lock people up. I mean, I know teenage boys who only coped through lockdown because they could go out on their bike every day. You know, I think we need to recognize that in small households who've got by for years by people going out at different times of the year, if you're all locked down together, you know, it does put stresses and strains of all sorts that just become intolerable, even for very well-meaning people. So I think we need some sort of serious social policy thinking about the harms of lockdown. And, you know, when we think, if we ever go into lockdown again, we should think more about how to mitigate these harms. And we should also think, you know, including closing the schools, just things that taking away people's access to their friends. You know, it's a complex social policy thing, but I think we need to talk about it, and I'm very glad that you have. So,
excellent, thank you very much. We've got a flurry of questions coming in now, so Thank you very much for your responses. Do you think that there could ever be crossover between brotherhood and sisterhood, not in a gendered way, but in terms of compassion, empathy, and understanding, without having these social constructs in society? And that's a question from Sister Zarina Ahmed.
Yes, hello, this is Sister Serena Ahmed.
Hi.
Fatima, would you like to answer the question? Brotherhood and sisterhood.
Sorry, could you just repeat that question again? Sorry.
Yeah, just a second. So do you think that there could ever be crossover between brotherhood and sisterhood, not in a gendered way, but in terms of compassion, empathy, and understanding, without having these social constructs in society?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, it kind of depends on the layout of the society. I mean, it definitely is there in place, but I think like certain frameworks should be established to like follow for it to not be you know, dependent on social constructs. But yeah, I think it could definitely happen, but I think it's something that should be worked on through time. Like it's not something that can happen straight away. Like things should be tested out, ways in which communities can work, and how they can work together within their communities and with other communities. Yeah, I just think it's a matter of trialing and testing out how things could work best.
Okay, brilliant. Philomena's asked the question: I have visited several mosques and only had the opportunity to speak to men. How can I approach women at the mosque and converse with them?
I think that's another one for you, Fatima.
Well, I think see, that's the other issue about being available on social media and being able to reach women. I understand, well, in Islam there's across the UK, in Islam, Sunni is the dominant religion, and the bigger mosques are from Sunni based. I think the brothers, they should be free to ask that from brothers, that they want to reach the sisters and talk to women, so they should connect them and probably be more open to providing like a communication platform, or like there being like a display board or something, or them being more inclusive of women, so that people who are interested are able to talk to women, really.
Great, thank you very much. Anne Rennie has posed the question: women need to be more tolerant to each other's culture and preferences. Religion should not be used as an excuse or a reason to judge how others dress or present themselves. God created men and women in the first instance naked, so he put no regulations on either sex. So can we not learn to accept our differences as God intended? So I guess it's less a question, more reaffirmation of the content that's been spoken about. But if you want to add anything, then feel free.
I don't have anything to add.
I mean, one point I might make is there are certain newspapers, I mean, I'll mention The Guardian because it's one I read, where, I mean, they have a fashion column, which is just totally about policing women and how they look. And, you know, the way that you're policed about your furniture and your house and your cooking and your everything in the sort of Sunday supplements is something I think we should call out, because, you know, there are in fact secular views on how you should be, how you should dress, how you should eat, how you should interact with each other, and especially for women, which are much, much, much more constraining than anything any of the religions that are practiced in this country do. And the people themselves don't see it. I mean, the sort of rulings that The Guardian hands down constantly about what plants you should have in your garden and what is or isn't an appropriate thing to serve on your dinner table. You know, why is that somehow good? And our ideas about how we should dress or what we should eat are not. You know, that I think some of this is just a question of starting to think about the ways in which society in general is organized.
Mm-hmm. There does seem to be a lot of policing one another for sure, and that's something we all agree on. Thank you for that. A question from Jackie, quite an important one. I have found that in faith and philosophy education, there are so many more male voices and stories. I do miss women's context in history and culture, so I would agree we need more women's stories told, but not sure how to do this. So an important question of how to actually present more female stories to the wider world, I guess.
Could I pick that up? Because that's something that
Go ahead, Sara, yes.
I mean, both that and the experience of the people of color. There's really a revolution going on in the universities at the moment, certainly in this country, to bring all those stories forward in history teaching and in really all the arts. To, you know, there's the decolonizing the curriculum kind of movement, but there's also the getting women into the curriculum. And so, I mean, for some years now, maybe for 5 or 6 years, that there've been, you know, you've had to actually say whenever you proposed a new course for my school of divinity, how does it address the aims of inclusivity? You know, do you have women writers on your reading list? Do you have people who are not Westerners? Do you have, are you just studying white males? You know, you couldn't now just bring a course that proposed to study nothing but white males. You would have to bring on females, you'd have to bring on people of color. And that's being systematically done now, I think, in universities, it's fair to say. And I would imagine that the same is true across Scotland and across England, really.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Fatima, I was just going to say I was very interested in when you spoke first about Lady Mariam and about all the women. Oh, I think Sara is right about universities and wider society, but I wonder if it's not a challenge to religious traditions to make more of, or to make sure we hear the stories of women in our traditions. Do you think that is happening in your tradition?
Yeah, I mean, definitely in our tradition, in Shia Islam especially, we have mainly after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, days are dedicated to celebrate the birthday of the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. We call it Women's Day, Mother's Day. We have that. We have Daughter's Day, the day of the birth of Lady Ma'suma, who is the sister of the 8th Imam of the Shia Islam, which we have that. But then I think, generally, if we move out a bit, I think we shouldn't forget that we're only 2 years after a century where women just gained the right to vote. And I think like it's a slow progress, but I think we're getting there very gradually, where women are more active in education, in society, where their voices are being heard. And I mean, not to mention, I mean, I did mention Sister Banu Amin, who was a very important figure in Shia seminaries, where no one was able to gain her status religious education. Like in terms of educational knowledge, she reached the highest status of close to marja knowledge, but not many women have been able to achieve that yet, but they're in the process of getting there. And I think it's just a matter of time where women can be more outspoken with historical figures, or, you know, their own views in general.
Thank you.
If I could say a word about that, because Fatima started by talking about Mary, and one problem that I've run into when talking to Catholic feminists, of whom I have many among my friends, is there's terrible tendency among Catholics to write off everything that was achieved, Catholic women, and women in general, to write off everything that was achieved by previous generations and decide it's counter-revolutionary and they don't like it. So all the kind of panoply of women's saints, all the panoply of, well, all the devotions to Mary, there's actually masses of stuff on women in the Catholic tradition, but a whole generation just swept it away because they said, oh no, that's not the women we want. We don't want Mary, you know, she's there to make us feel obedient, and she's there to kind of be the sort of person that the men want us to be. And you're like, why do you look at it like that? you know, that why do you think, you find this still in the tablet all the time, argument. There's a splendid argument a couple of weeks ago between people about, you know, does Mary's virginity empower women or not? I mean, I could talk for an hour about that, but the thing is, if you're not prepared to accept women the way they have actually been, if the only women you're interested in is the ones who are liberated in the way that you think liberation should work, then you are not going to hear the stories of women, because most of the stories of women are going to be stories you don't actually like. And that's probably enough for me.
That's a very challenging note.
That is very true. I agree.
Maya, do we have some other questions?
Yeah, so Paul has
Time
asked,
for one more. Time for one more.
so Paul has asked the question: the attractive fraternity and sisterhood presumes equality. How do sisters and brothers see religious equality in order to build a genuine fraternity and sorority?
Great question there.
Fatima, would you like to address that first?
I
That's
think
a big question.
yeah, it is. Like the document should be studied in depth, and I think it should be like a point of academic research as well, because there's a lot to take from that, and like a lot of cultural barriers need to be acknowledged first to be able to deal with them in the best way. And as once we acknowledge that there are issues, then we can create like a some sort of like a version of an arc of fraternity within our communities, to then be able to build it up with other religions of other faiths, and be able to collaborate outwardly and inwardly in general. I think acknowledging the cultural barriers is the first step.
Thank you. Sara, would you like to have another word? And I think we're nearly finished with our discussion for the evening. Thank you, Fatima.
Sure.
I mean, it's such a big question. The only thing I haven't mentioned that I would like to mention, which is a problem for women, I think, is that I'm sure we've all had this experience. You talk to men, the men you're married to, I mean, the one man you're married to, or the men in your family, and they're very, very receptive and very interested to hear you on your own. But they get in a group of men and everything is out the window, because they do not want to be embarrassed by the other men and in front of the other men. And I do not know how we can change that, except to have women at the table, and except to have, to how you engage between the single sex, affirming of sisterhood, affirming of brotherhood, and then bringing the two together. I don't know, except to name the realities and to say, and to study the social reality and the historical reality, and just to say, look, I know it makes you all feel great to get together and slag off women, or the other way around, because women do it as well. I know it makes you all feel great to get together and slag off men, but how do we get beyond that and actually talk together as groups, and not just go off together as ones and twos and have coffee and listen to each other and then get back into our groups and slag each other off? I don't know. That's your answer.
Well, thank you very much, Sara, and thank you, Fatima. I think we are coming to an end, but I think you have both kind of identified many of the issues that we really need to address together as we move forward. But I love that last note where the sisterhood on one hand and the brotherhood on the other really need to do a lot of thinking about how we might bring whatever we have to bring together to make things happen and steer the ship a bit further on. So I think Maya wants to finish the discussion now.
Yeah, I think that final kind of note is a really important one, because we can't kind of free women without also freeing men, because in a way these thoughts and kind of social constructs aren't helping them either. So on a final note, let us remember that we are eternal souls within a temporary human form, whether fashioned as male or female. We are equal in the sight of God. In Surah Al-Imran, verse 195, it stated, "So their Lord responded to them, I will never deny any of you, male or female, the reward of your deeds. Both are equal in reward, And this verse like beautifully emphasizes that our conduct and deeds are what matter in the sight of God, and men and women have equal intellectual and spiritual potentialities. Equally, in chapter 1 of the Corinthians, verse 11 to 12, it stated, "Woman is not independent of man, nor man of woman." And the verse concludes, "And all things are from God." So this kind of has two really important elements. It has the role of kind of identifying that we need each other's support to really kind of liberate society as a whole. And it also highlights the complementary nature of men and women and their reliance on one another in this journey of life. We're each traversing a path back to our Creator, and it's only through the preservation of one another's dignity, a path back to our Creator, a dedication to human fraternity in its true essence, and by holding tightly to the rope of God that we can attain success. I encourage all of you to continue this important topic in conversations with family, friends, and your respective communities. And it's really those discussions and this kind of snowball effect, hopefully, which will help us see a real change. Thank you very much to Mary, Sara, and Fatima, to all three of you for an excellent discussion dialogue, which I'm sure we've all taken so much away from. Thank you to the organising group from Ahmed Society Scotland and Bishops Committee for Interreligious Dialogue, and thank you to all of our participants. Thank you for coming. We bid you a farewell, and we also like to remind you that the dialogues will continue and that we'll be celebrating Human Fraternity Day in 2023, God willing, and hopefully see you all there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you
for having us.
Thank you.